Have you ever felt it? That cold, unsettling whisper in the back of your mind, the feeling that something isn't quite right, that the game is rigged, the dice loaded, long before you even sat down at the table. You walk through your days, a player on a stage you didn't design, speaking lines you didn't write. You strive, you toil, you believe you are making your own choices, forging your own path. But what if the path was already paved, the destination predetermined by forces you cannot see, by a power so insidious, so deeply embedded in the fabric of your reality, that you mistake its chains for freedom? This isn't a ghost story, nor a cheap thriller. This is the chilling reality of silent power, the invisible architecture of control that shapes your life, your thoughts, your very desires, often without you ever suspecting its presence. You think you're free, but are you truly? Or are you merely a sophisticated puppet, dancing to a tune played by a hidden hand? Tonight, we delve into the abyss of this control, guided by a mind that dared to dissect power in its most naked and ruthless form. Tonight we confront the unsettling possibility that you are being used meticulously and silently without ever realizing it. The truth can be a bitter pill, but ignorance is a cage. To understand the nature of this silent control, we must turn to a name that has echoed through the centuries, often whispered with a mixture of fear and reluctant admiration: Niccolo Machiavelli. Born in Florence in 1469, a time of political turmoil, shifting allegiances, and brutal power plays, Machiavelli was no armchair philosopher. He was a diplomat, a political official, a man who stared into the cold, hard eyes of power and did not flinch. He saw firsthand how states rose and fell, how leaders captivated and crushed, how the appearance of virtue could be a more potent weapon than virtue itself. His most infamous work, The Prince, wasn't a guide for the benevolent ruler. It was a stark, unflinching manual on how to acquire and maintain political power, often through means that polite society would deem unsavory. Machiavelli's core insight, the one that chills us even today, is that power has its own morality, or rather, it often operates beyond the conventional morality we preach. He argued that it is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. He wasn't advocating for needless cruelty, but for a pragmatic understanding that human nature is fickle, driven by self-interest, and that a ruler who relies solely on the affection of his people is building his castle on sand. He saw that men are so simple and so obedient to present necessities that he who deceives will always find someone who will let himself be deceived. This isn't cynicism for its own sake. It's a brutal assessment of the human condition when power is at stake. How does this connect to your life, to the silent control we speak of? Because the principles Machiavelli outlined for princes 5 centuries ago are still being deployed, not just by world leaders, but in boardrooms, in social circles, even in personal relationships. The tactics of subtle manipulation, of managing perceptions, of exploiting weaknesses, these are the timeless tools of those who seek to control, often operating just beneath the surface of your awareness. Machiavelli didn't invent these methods. He merely had the audacity to write them down, to expose the uncomfortable truth that power, in its essence, is a relentless, often ruthless game. And the first rule of the game is to understand that it's being played. Where does this silent control take root? What is the fertile ground from which this subtle manipulation springs? It begins in the most human of places: our desires, our fears, our inherent need for security and belonging. Think about it. You crave acceptance. You yearn for stability. You fear isolation, ridicule, and failure. These are not weaknesses, they are fundamental aspects of our shared humanity. But it is precisely these deeply human vulnerabilities that become the anchor points for silent power. The promise of fulfilling these desires, or the threat of exacerbating these fears, is the currency of control. Consider the relentless pressure to conform, to fit a certain mold: the perfect employee, the ideal partner, the successful individual. Where does this pressure originate? Often, it's not from a single identifiable source, but from a pervasive cultural narrative, a set of unspoken rules and expectations. You see it in the curated perfection of social media, where lives are edited into an impossible standard, leaving you feeling inadequate, forever chasing an illusion. You feel it in the workplace, where unspoken hierarchies and subtle power dynamics dictate who gets heard and who gets overlooked, not always based on merit, but on an understanding of the invisible game. Think of the times you've held your tongue, not because you were wrong, but because speaking out felt too risky, too threatening to your position or your relationships. That hesitation, that self-censorship, that is the echo of silent power. It thrives in the ambiguity of social codes, in the fear of rocking the boat, in our desperate need to be seen as normal or successful, according to definitions we rarely question. The pain isn't just in the manipulation itself, but in the slow erosion of your authentic self, the quiet sacrifice of your own voice at the altar of external validation or the avoidance of discomfort. This is where the chains are first forged. The true genius of silent power lies in its ability to disguise itself, to convince you that its chains are in fact your own choices, your own desires. The grand illusion that keeps you bound is the belief in a perfectly fair, meritocratic world where your efforts alone determine your outcomes. Society, in many ways, doesn't want you to understand the mechanics of this subtle control. It's far more convenient if you believe that success is purely a matter of hard work and talent, and failure, purely a matter of personal inadequacy. Why? Because this narrative keeps the existing power structures intact. It places the burden of systemic inequalities squarely on the shoulders of the individual. Think of the pervasive myth of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. While individual effort is undeniably important, this idea conveniently ignores the vastly different starting lines, the invisible barriers, and the networks of influence that often predetermine who gets a seat at the table. You're told to follow your passion, but how much of that passion is genuinely yours, and how much has been subtly shaped by what society deems valuable or aspirational? You're encouraged to consume, to acquire, to measure your worth by external markers, all while the puppet masters profit from your endless striving. The illusion is that you are the sovereign ruler of your own life. The reality, as Machiavelli would ruthlessly point out, is that you are often a pawn in a much larger game, your desires skillfully manipulated to serve agendas that are not your own. They don't want you to see the strings, because an aware puppet is a dangerous puppet. They want you to believe the narrative, to internalize the blame, to keep chasing the carrot on a stick, forever oblivious to the hand that holds it just out of reach. This is the lie that perpetuates your servitude, the lie that you are entirely and solely in control, when in fact unseen forces are constantly nudging, guiding, and constraining you. Now, let us hold up Machiavelli's unforgiving mirror to this illusion. What is the raw, unvarnished truth he reveals about the silent power that governs us? It is this: power is not inherently good or evil. It simply is, and those who understand its mechanisms will always have an advantage over those who do not. Machiavelli teaches us that appearances are paramount. Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, for everyone can see but few can feel. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. This is the bedrock of silent control. It's not about genuine virtue, but the perception of virtue. It's not about fairness, but the appearance of fairness. Think about the carefully crafted public images of corporations, politicians, even influencers. The philanthropic gestures that mask exploitative practices, the rhetoric of unity that conceals divisive agendas, the curated online personas that hide deep insecurities or manipulative intent. Machiavelli would not be surprised. He understood that people are swayed by what they see and what they are told, especially if it confirms their biases or alleviates their fears. The truth, applied to our modern lives, is that you are constantly being managed. Your perceptions are being shaped. The information you receive is often filtered, framed, and delivered with a specific intent, to elicit a desired response, to maintain a certain order, to protect vested interests. He would argue that those in power, whether they consciously subscribe to his teachings or not, instinctively understand that maintaining control often requires a degree of deception, a skillful manipulation of public sentiment. The uncomfortable truth is that the systems you navigate are often designed not for your ultimate liberation, but for their own perpetuation, and your ignorance of these dynamics is their greatest asset. To be unaware of the game is to be a guaranteed loser. And what happens when the veil begins to lift? When Machiavelli's stark truths pierce through the comforting illusions, a storm erupts, not in the streets, not yet, but within the hidden landscape of your own mind, your own heart. This is the crucible of internal conflict, the agonizing space between blissful ignorance and painful awareness. Suddenly, the world looks different. The casual reassurances of authority figures ring hollow. The motivations of those around you, once taken at face value, now appear suspect, layered with unspoken agendas. You start to see the subtle manipulations in advertising, the calculated narratives in the news, the power plays in your own workplace, your own relationships. It's a disorienting, deeply unsettling experience. You might feel anger, a righteous fury at having been deceived, at having your agency subtly undermined. You might feel fear, the chilling realization of your own vulnerability, the dawning awareness of how deeply these control mechanisms are embedded. There's a profound sense of disillusionment, a loss of innocence as the comforting narratives crumble. Who can you trust? What can you believe? The very foundations of your understanding of the world begin to shake. This internal war is exhausting. Part of you might yearn to retreat, to pull the blanket of ignorance back over your head, to return to a simpler, albeit less truthful, existence. The weight of this new awareness can feel crushing. You see the strings, and now you feel their pull more acutely than ever. This is a critical juncture. It's the point where many recoil, unable or unwilling to bear the discomfort of this raw perception. But it is also the precise point where true transformation begins. For it is only by confronting the reality of these silent powers, by acknowledging the conflict they ignite within you, that you can begin to reclaim your sovereignty. This pain, this disillusionment, this internal chaos, it is not the end. It is the painful, necessary birth of a new consciousness, a consciousness that is no longer content to be a passive recipient of a pre-packaged reality. It's the awakening of the strategist within, the part of you that, like Machiavelli, dares to look power in the eye. So you stand at the precipice, the truth a bitter taste in your mouth, the illusion shattered. What now? How can Machiavelli's cold, hard philosophy, which seems to describe the very mechanics of your cage, offer a path to liberation? The answer lies not in rejecting his insights, but in understanding them more deeply than your manipulators do. If silent power operates on deception and the exploitation of predictable human responses, then awareness and unpredictability become your shield and your sword. Liberation begins with radical self-honesty. Acknowledge your own desires, fears, and vanities, not to judge them, but to understand how they might be used against you. As Machiavelli advised princes to know the terrain, you must know your own inner landscape. The first step is to observe. Observe the narratives around you with a critical eye. Question the underlying assumptions. Ask cui bono, who benefits from this message, this policy, this trend? Become a student of power dynamics, not to become a ruthless manipulator yourself, but to recognize the tactics when they are deployed against you. Knowledge in this sense truly is power, the power to not be easily fooled. Secondly, cultivate discernment. Learn to distinguish between genuine influence, born of respect and shared values, and covert control, born of fear and deception. This requires a strong internal compass, a sense of your own core principles. Thirdly, reclaim your attention. Silent power thrives on a distracted, overwhelmed populace. By consciously choosing where you focus your energy and your mind, you begin to starve the mechanisms that seek to control your thoughts. This might mean curating your information diet, disconnecting from toxic environments, or simply creating space for quiet reflection. And finally, understand that true power isn't about dominating others. It's about mastering yourself. Machiavelli's prince sought to control his state. Your aim is to control your own inner state, your responses, your choices. By understanding the game, you are no longer an unwitting pawn. You can choose not to play by their rules, or if you must play, to do so with open eyes and a strategic mind. This is not a guarantee of an easy life, but it is a path towards an authentic one, a life lived with agency, even in the shadow of power. We have journeyed into the shadowy corridors of silent power, guided by the unflinching gaze of Machiavelli. We've seen how the strings are pulled, how the illusions are crafted, how our deepest human impulses can be turned into mechanisms of control. The world perhaps looks a little darker now, a little more complex, but it is also a world where you are a little more awake, a little less susceptible. The ultimate lesson Machiavelli imparts is not one of despair, but of stark, pragmatic realism. Power exists. It will always be sought. It will always be wielded. The only choice you have is whether to understand its nature or remain its victim. The chains of silent control are often forged from our own unexamined beliefs, our own unacknowledged fears. But what if the key to unlocking those chains also lies within you? What if this newfound awareness, this unsettling insight into the machinations of power, is not a burden, but an invitation to live more consciously, more critically, more authentically? The silent powers will continue their work, for that is their nature. They will adapt, they will find new veils, new methods, but now you have a choice. You can choose to see, you can choose to question, you can choose to navigate this world not as a sleepwalker, but as an aware participant, armed with the unsettling but empowering wisdom of a man who dared to tell the truth about power, no matter how uncomfortable. The game is, and always will be, afoot. The question that echoes long after the screen fades, long after my voice falls silent, is this: now that you've glimpsed the strings, will you continue to dance to their tune, or will you finally learn to cut them? The most profound control is the control you allow. What will you do with your newfound sight? If this video touched something within you, challenged your perceptions, or sparked a desire for deeper understanding, then let your voice be heard. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel for more journeys into the shadows, and share this with someone who needs to hear this truth today. Comment below with the insight that resonated most deeply, the question that still burns. We see you, we hear you, and we will meet again in the next exploration.